over to you.
Okay. We will introduce ourselves and then have you introduce yourself. My name is Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
My name is Lester Brooks. I teach in the history department at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
My name is Tim Moore. I'm from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution in the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. It's great to be here.
Hello, my name is Alejandra Guadarrama, and I'll be attending Indiana University and majoring in economics.
Hey, my name is Rob Garrett. I'll be attending Auburn University next year, studying political science.
Hi, my name is Anushka Patel. I'll be attending the University of Alabama at Birmingham, majoring in neuroscience as a precursor to medical school. Our teacher is Miss Amy Maddox, and we're very excited to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. We have questions.
Anushka and Rob, do you have fights about your next year, your loyalties?
No, sir. We're an Auburn family, so my family's glad I'm going.
But not yet any fights. And Alex, good luck, because I'm a graduate of IU.
Who's here? Yeah, next fall.
Go IU.
Yeah. So we have question number 1 for you today. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? And you may be.
Thank you. During the Philadelphia Convention, Delaware delegate John Dickinson proclaimed, "Let our government be like that of the solar system. Let the general government be like the sun, and the states, the planets, repelled yet attracted, and the whole system moving harmoniously." Delegates understood that finding common ground was crucial to create a government that could balance the preservation of political and social freedoms while also remaining powerful enough to effectively govern. However, at the time, provincialism held a tight grip on each state. Each state held different ideals and priorities that resulted in disagreements and thus needed compromises.
An early point of conflict was the structure of the representative system. The Virginia Plan, written by James Madison, called for a bicameral legislature with proportional representation and was radically different from that of the Confederation Congress. Later, William Patterson's New Jersey Plan proposed a unicameral legislature with equal votes for the states, similar to the Articles of Confederation. After extensive debate, the Connecticut Compromise emerged, providing a Senate with equal votes and a House of Representatives apportioned by population. The delegates, however, had yet to define population.
In 1780, the population of enslaved persons in the South was roughly 40%, a considerable number compared to the 4% in the North. To maximize their apportionment for representatives, the South demanded consideration of their enslaved population for representation. To settle this dispute, James Wilson and Roger Sherman proposed the 3/5 compromise, which said that 3/5 of each enslaved person would be counted for direct taxation and representation in the House of Representatives. In Federalist 54, Madison defended the 3/5 compromise, arguing enslaved persons were considered property under the law and should be counted as a combination of both property and people. Many founding fathers acknowledged the evils of slavery, yet slavery remained relatively unaddressed at the convention. This fuel waiting to be ignited later sparked the Civil War. The victory of the North secured the victory of the perpetual Union, as well as the emancipation of enslaved persons. However, slavery and its legacy remain a lasting stain in America today.
Another major disagreement surrounded the Bill of Rights, as the Anti-Federalists were concerned about not having enlisted rights protected by the Constitution. This issue went unresolved at the convention, but was later confronted during the ratification debates. Patrick Henry's speech at the 1788 Virginia Convention emphasized the importance of a Bill of Rights, which would put an end to the oppression of rights by the monarchy by defining the rights of the people and limiting the king's prerogative. Ultimately, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution, and the 9 states required ratified the document.
Lastly, one of the largest issues left unresolved was federalism. From McCulloch v. Maryland to Bostock v. Clayton County, responsibility for drawing the line between state and federal authority has lied with the Supreme Court, leaving many Americans to fear that their rights will be threatened each time there's a change in the court. Thus, Congress should take a more active role in creating legislation that protects people's rights.
Framers intended for the Constitution to be amendable in order to adapt to the ever-changing needs of the nation as reflected in Article 5. We believe the Constitution could be amended to better represent the modern United States. Firstly, the Electoral College should be reformed as it allows for the formation of faithless electors. Secondly, the punishment clause of the 13th Amendment should be removed as a means of ending for-profit prison labor that has fueled the over-incarceration of African Americans since the Civil War era. Lastly, we believe that the Constitution should guarantee the right of education throughout the country. Improvements to the Constitution are necessary to ensure that our democratic system moves harmoniously in this experiment of American democracy. Thank you, and we're ready for your questions.
Tim?
Sure. I'm going to propose that the delegates at Philadelphia were bad men because they didn't do what they were sent to do. Is anybody with me on this, or not?
Were you referring to the fact that they were sent to
Yeah, I agree. I understand where you're coming from. I think that was one of the major disagreements, whether we should stick to the Articles of Confederation or create a whole new constitution. As we saw, 2 out of 3 delegates from New York abandoned the convention as soon as the idea of creating a whole form of government, they abandoned the convention. However, as we saw in the end product was way more beneficial.
And I think that's something that we can say kind of for disagreement's sake. We know that the Articles of Confederation with Shays Rebellion, we saw that there was really a need for change. And after Madison really proposed that Virginia plan, and we saw that influence of the different plans that were brought to the convention, and we saw that creation of the Constitution, and that came to light. I think we really saw a beneficial way that a reform and a new type of document would be able to govern the American people.
And I think there is value in coming to Philadelphia and instead of amending, creating a whole new document, because as we saw, that the Articles of Confederation were broken. There was no federal power. The Congress had no right to tax, and they couldn't regulate commerce. So you can call them evil, but I would say that drafting the new document was way more beneficial than amending the articles.
And just adding to what Rob said, I think like the main difference we can see between the articles and the Constitution is that with the articles, you needed all 9 states to ratify a new change, whereas with the Constitution, it's a little bit more flexible, having those 3/4 of the states.
Let me jump in here and ask about this issue of slavery. And did the founding fathers make a mistake by compromising and letting it continue instead of resolving it right then? You pointed out some issues that come up later. Can you point out some more? Well, why not solve it right then and there?
As Rob mentioned, I mean, at the time, the population of enslaved people in the South was 40%. So I think that slavery was far from over in the South at the time. And one of the biggest issues is that many scholars agree that if the 3/5 clause had not been passed, the South would have not ratified the Constitution. And without being in a unified country, the North would have not had the same authority over the South.
And I think that we can also look to Madison's perspective. I know we kind of mentioned this in Federalist 54. Madison wrote a document that supported the idea that 3/5 compromise. But you could see after reading the document that his tone was very much against that idea of slavery and keeping that in the document. And I think his main concern was that without this 3/5 compromise, as Ali mentioned before, the Constitution would be unable to pass. I do understand that looking at how that played out with the Civil War, it was to an extent one of the biggest flaws of the Constitution and something that we were able to see. But I think if you look at the founders' mentality, they were very much interested in making sure that the Constitution would pass. So they considered one of these compromises.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things the U.S. Constitution doesn't define very much, doesn't really spell out, is presidential power. Do you think that they would have envisioned what the role of the presidency today and the power in the executive branch versus back then, or is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that this has really evolved. I think with the presidency, we see that increased power of the executive branch. I think that's something that they really had considered, especially in Federalist 51. We saw that importance that they placed on the separation of checks and balances and having that separation of the three branches. I think that they wouldn't have, to an extent, provided that the opportunity that in the future that the executive branch would have so much power. I think if we look at the Great Depression and even the Civil War and the way that President Lincoln used his executive powers, I think we really saw that grow. And I think that that is one of the branches that has grown the most over time.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anushka. She mentioned the Civil War and the Great Depression. And as we saw in the Civil War, President Lincoln with the suspension of habeas corpus, and then later FDR with passing over almost 4,000 executive orders, we can see that the founders did not have the specifics in mind, but they did understand the need for a commander-in-chief who would be there in times of need.
Do you think secrecy was a good idea for Philadelphia?
I think it was because at the time, for Madison, especially, his concern was that the Constitution simply would not pass. They were not able to make changes if the public was constantly giving out opinions. And I think we can even see some of the similar effect with C-SPAN and in Congress today. So I think that at the time it was beneficial that the founders had some privacy in order to debate and reach compromises.
However, I think that I would slightly disagree with that notion. I think, kind of for disagreement's sake, the Constitutional Convention to an extent was kept away from the people. And the whole idea of the Constitution is to make sure that it's open to the public, that they should be the ones making the changes. And I think that keeping that closed off and very much focused on this group of people that weren't, to an extent, representative of our population, they were mostly composed of rich Caucasian men, and that to an extent didn't represent the American population. So I think that the Constitutional Convention should have been kept slightly more open and a way for the public to be able to see what was going on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Anushka here. Our democracy is built on popular sovereignty, and how can you go forward with that notion without the posturing and pandering to public opinion?
So you have faith in the people in choosing right.
So I think that's something that we have to consider here is that the people are the basis of our government. But I think that's something that we really have to consider, especially with our notion of how our government is today, is that people gain the proper civic education, especially through programs like We the People, being able to understand the way that our government works and to become effective citizens in society.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anushka. We've talked about a lot about reform, but we really have to question, should the game change, or should the players change? And I think that a lot of that responsibility has to lie with citizens and investing in civic programs. We have the fortune of being members of We the People. However, we should believe that every citizen in America should have some sort of civic education that goes past 7th grade.
Do you think that our federalism system has been working?
I think that it has its ups and downs. As we can see in the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen efforts of independent states before the passage of the Relief Act. There was 29 states who made some sort of legislation to help relieve this pandemic, and we saw the benefit of having the states in charge of that. And later in 2021, with the passage of the Relief Act, we saw how the federal government, the national government, was very effective in rolling out vaccines.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Give you a
Thank
round
you
of
so
applause.
much.
Thank you, guys.
Of course, we're not leaving quite yet. We have some things to tell you. So Lester, would you like to start?
Okay. The introduction, I like the introduction. You brought in John Dickinson, and that was pretty good in explaining the solar system and federalism. So that was pretty good. But you also then went into provincialism and saw the problem there as well. In the follow-up questions, it was very, no one has mentioned this, that the 13th Amendment and that little phrase in there that allows slavery to continue even today. and you brought that in. I also like that you were eager. It seemed like you guys were eager to answer these questions. You were raring to go and even disagreed. And so I like that. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tim?
Oh, I'll go. Well, first of all, you're so eager that Alex, I'm afraid of you. You're so eager. Great. No, I don't mean that as a criticism at all. I just it's great to see folks lean into this process, and I think you're onto something here, that they did not solve federalism. I mean, that is in many ways, federalism, it ties into the other issues that you explicitly stated. So that was an important statement, I think, in your 4 minutes. Now, having said that, I would have liked to heard a little bit more, because you inferred or explicitly stated, and the court tries to solve that. I would have liked to heard a little bit more like, okay, here's a federalism case where the court tried to solve it. Maybe McCullough, or even the gun case in the 90s. I mean, there's all kinds of federalism cases, as you know. I think that would have really, really made that argument effective. But the fact that they punted on federalism and left it nebulous, that's a remarkable, important thing for you to understand. That's great. You also mentioned one of the weirdest Federalist Papers, 54, where Madison he creates this hypothetical Southern gentleman. He can't even, he just reveals how tortured he is about slavery. So I appreciate the fact that you mentioned one of the nastiest, weird Federalist Papers in your presentation. And honestly, it is a tortured explanation from a moral point of view. So there's a lot in here for us to think about, and I appreciate your thoroughness. And you have a great teacher, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it too. I especially enjoyed the Dickinson quote with the solar system and being able to find common ground. It was a nice presentation. It was well thought out, orderly, and that's nice, and made it easy for me as a judge to go through and hear that yes, you do know this, or you understand these principles, and gave me something to think about, and also trying to think about questions. You guys are just so good at answering it. We don't have enough time to actually work with you even more. I would have loved to have spent more time with you. I have more questions to ask, but you did a good job. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time.
Good luck.
We really appreciate it.